My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 32. And the last Christmas I spent with my family taught me a lesson I wish I hadn't learned the hard way sometimes. You're not excluded because you were wrong, but because you stopped being convenient. When I met Lisa, I didn't expect her to fit into my family better than I ever did. I brought her to Thanksgiving the first year we dated. She wore a modest beige sweater, complimented the green bean casserole like it was made by a Michelin chef, and remembered the name of my cousin's cat. My mom was instantly smitten. "She's lovely, Claire," she whispered that night as I washed dishes. So polite, so calm. As if I wasn't those things too, just in louder, less symmetrical packaging. We stayed together for 5 years. 5 Thanksgivings, 5 Christmases, 5 4th of Julys where Lisa helped with the potato salad and laughed at Uncle Tom's weird political jokes. She blended in like cream into coffee. But me, I always felt like I had to stir harder just to stay in the cup. Still, I was happy. Or I thought I was. I had Lisa. And maybe I didn't need to feel like the golden child when I had someone golden by my side. Until last October. Lisa came home one night, took off her shoes with unusual care, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and said, "I think we're done. No storm, no cheating, no scandal, just done." Like someone flipping a sign from open to closed with practiced detachment. I asked why. She said she didn't feel lit up anymore. I asked if she'd loved me. She nodded, once. The kind of nod that tells you love has expired like forgotten yogurt in the back of the fridge. I cried. She didn't. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 2 weeks later when I got a group message from my sister. "Just confirming everyone's good for Thanksgiving, Lisa. You're bringing sweet potato pie again. Right." I stared at the screen like it was a joke. A mistake. Surely my sister meant to send that to another Lisa. But no, it was my Lisa. Well, not mine anymore. The Lisa who had just ended our 5-year relationship was still being invited to family dinner, and I wasn't. I didn't reply. An hour later, my mom texted me privately, "You're welcome too, Claire. But please don't make it uncomfortable for her. She's still part of the family." That broke something. Not just because Lisa had become more family than I ever felt. Not just because I was being treated like a volatile element in my own bloodline. But because my mother, the woman I had cared for through her gallbladder surgery, who I'd driven to radiation appointments during a cancer scare, who I'd comforted when she cried over her own childhood trauma, now spoke to me like a stranger who needed to behave. I didn't go to Thanksgiving. I didn't go to Christmas either. Instead, I sat in my apartment in Boston, watching the snow fall outside my 3rd-story window, scrolling through Instagram posts of Lisa laughing in my sister's kitchen, holding my nephew like she was the godmother of the clan. My family posted pictures tagged #family1st. I wasn't in a single one, but I was still on the deed to the cabin. That mattered more than I realized at the time. The cabin wasn't just some rustic house in the woods. It was legacy. My grandfather built it with his bare hands in the 70s, poured the concrete himself, lined the walls with cedar from his own land. Every Christmas, we'd go up there as kids. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just firewood, card games, and Grandpa's horrible chili. When he passed, he left the cabin jointly to me and my mom, said it should be shared by those who remember what it means. My mom didn't care. She liked spas, liked cruise ships and holiday packages. So, I handled the bills, the upkeep, even sent Jeff, the old groundskeeper, to keep the pipes from freezing. I did it quietly, not for credit, but because it mattered to me. So, when Christmas rolled around again, and my sister messaged the group, "Hey, can someone check if the cabin stocked Lisa and I are going to head up early this year?" I paused. "Lisa and I are gonna..." They were still choosing her. Still pretending I didn't exist. Still using what I protected. as if I were the outsider. That night, I called Jeff. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Anything, Claire." "Change the locks." He was quiet for a second. "You sure?" I was more than I'd ever been about anything. And that's how the story of my quiet revenge began, not with fireworks or fury, but with a subtle click of a lock turning. They wouldn't know what hit them. The morning after Jeff changed the locks, I woke up feeling a strange calm, like the kind of stillness that comes after a storm you didn't know you needed. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my mom, definitely not Lisa. I wanted silence. I wanted them to walk into the woods and realize, for once, that the door wouldn't open just because they believed it would, that they were no longer entitled to the space they so effortlessly claimed. I waited. December 23rd came. My sister texted the group chat. "Headed up to the cabin tonight, Claire. You coming?" The kind of message that wasn't an invitation so much as a performance. I didn't respond. Then the storm began. At 8:43 p.m., I got the first call from my mom. I didn't answer. At 8:46, my sister called. Then again at 8:49. At 9:02, she finally sent a voice note. "Claire, what the hell? We're at the cabin. The key doesn't work. Lisa thinks maybe the lock froze, but it's not even, can you explain?" I pressed play again just to hear the panic. There was something satisfying in it. Not cruel satisfaction, but a release. Like justice finding a quiet way to whisper, "I see you." A few minutes later, she texted, "Did you change the locks?" I didn't answer. By morning, I had 8 missed calls, 3 voicemails from my mother, 1 particularly long message from Lisa herself, which began with a sugary, "Hey Claire, I hope you're okay," and ended with, "We just want to understand what's going on. This doesn't feel like you." That last line made me laugh. Lisa had always told people I was the stable one. Predictable, rational, inoffensive, and for years. I wore that like a compliment, but now, hearing her say this doesn't feel like you felt like the first honest assessment she'd made. She was right. It wasn't me, not the old me. But it was the me who finally understood that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. That afternoon, my mom emailed me, not texted, emailed. "Claire, your behavior is unacceptable. You've locked out your entire family on Christmas. Lisa drove all the way from New York to be here. This is petty and hurtful. We don't know what's gotten into you. Call me back, now." There it was again. That word family, tossed around like a sacred shield. Your family. The same one who couldn't be bothered to defend me when I was phased out like a side character. The same one who made me promise not to make it awkward if I dared show up to my own mother's dinner table. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Jeff again. "Hey," I said, "did they leave?" "Left around noon. Pretty angry." He chuckled. "You want me to do a sweep?" "Yeah, make sure they didn't break a window or anything." They didn't. Lisa just sat on the porch crying for a bit. Your sister kept pacing. Your mom called me a traitor. I told her the property was legally half yours, and you had every right. I smiled. "Thanks, Jeff." "Good for you, Claire. About damn time." The next day, I sent out a short message in the group chat. "I have decided to use the cabin privately from now on. Please don't go up without asking. I've paid for the repairs and maintenance for 5 years. This is no longer shared." Ellen, my sister, replied first. "Wait, are you serious?" Then my mom. "That place belongs to the family, not just you." I responded only once. Funny, I thought the same about myself. Turns out I was wrong too. No one said anything after that. But silence can be louder than screaming. That night, I sat in the cabin alone, fire burning low, a glass of wine in my hand, the same chair my grandfather used to rock in. There was a photo on the mantel me at age 9 holding a marshmallow stick, Lisa standing next to me even back then, when we were just kids from the same town. I hadn't realized she was in that photo until that moment. I took it down, slid it into a drawer, not out of hate, but to make room for new memories, ones that weren't curated by people who only loved convenience. As the fire crackled, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. The kind of clarity that comes from finally stepping out of a fog you didn't know you'd been walking through for years. And yet, I knew this wasn't over. My family didn't like being told no. And Lisa, she wasn't just going to fade away. She had a grip on them that ran deeper than I understood. And the more I pulled back, the tighter they'd try to pull her in. Something told me the real confrontation hadn't even started yet. 3 days passed after the cabin incident, and I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, not even passive-aggressive social media posts. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I had finally drawn a line so bold they were forced to acknowledge it. But peace never lasts long in a family that hates being confronted. It was the morning of December 28th when the knock came. Or rather, the knock that didn't. I had just come back from a walk in the woods, cheeks red with cold, fingers still tingling through my gloves. I opened the cabin door and froze. Lisa was sitting on the porch steps. No coat, no bag, just her, hugging her knees like she was 13 again. She looked up, eyes rimmed with that familiar pink she used to get when she cried quietly, not the kind of cry you hear, but the kind that simmers just beneath the skin. "What are you doing here?" I asked. I didn't know where else to go. "You drove 2 hours to tell me that." She didn't answer, just looked at me, like I was the villain in her redemption arc, like somehow I was the one who left her stranded in the past. "I didn't drive," she finally said. "Your mom did. She dropped me off in town." I blinked. "You're kidding." She said if I wanted to fix this, I had to do it myself. I let out a short laugh. Not the funny kind, the kind that breaks mid-throat. Raw and bitter. Fix what? Exactly. The part where you ghosted me emotionally for a year? Or the part where you replaced me before my seat even got cold at the table? Her eyes dropped. "Claire, I didn't mean to become part of your family. But you did. And you didn't stop it either. You liked being the center of attention. But you hated how they loved me." That hit like a slap, because it was partially true, but only partially. Yes, I envied the ease with which she was adored, but I never resented her for it. I resented them for loving the surface version of me she helped them paint, while dismissing the messy, real parts I never hid. "You used me," I said. "You used my family as insulation, and when it got cold, you wrapped yourself in them and tossed me out in the snow." She didn't deny it. "Instead," she whispered, "they made me feel safe. More than you did. Sometimes." It was a low blow, but it wasn't untrue. I'd spent the last year of our relationship drifting overwhelmed by work. Deadlines, deadlines, deadlines. I hadn't made her a priority, but I never stopped choosing her. She, on the other hand, had made a choice the moment she let my sister invite her to Christmas like it was nothing. "I didn't come to fight," Lisa said. "I came to say I'm sorry, and that I'm leaving." I tilted my head. "Leaving? Boston, the city, your family, all of it. I took a job in Oregon. I'm starting over." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt an unexpected pang, a nostalgia for a future we never got to live. Another part of me felt liberated. She stood, brushing snow off her pants. I wanted to say goodbye in person. That's all. I looked at her for a long second, then stepped aside. "Come in, just for a minute. It's cold." She hesitated, then nodded. "Inside." We didn't talk much. She sat on the couch. I made tea. For a moment. It felt like one of those quiet mornings we used to share, when words were scarce but understanding was abundant. I was angry, she said, when you changed the locks, but also proud of you. I raised an eyebrow. You always tried so hard to keep the peace, even when it hurt you. This was the first time I saw you choose you. It was the closest thing to closure I would ever get, and in that moment, it was enough. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. She left without looking back. But as the door clicked shut behind her, I felt something in me realign, like a bone that had been broken for years, but was only now starting to heal. That night, my mom called again. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "I heard Lisa stopped by. You really hurt her." No, I thought, she was already hurt before she came here. She just didn't know it yet. And then 2 minutes later, another text. "I think you should apologize. You've let this go too far." It was almost laughable, the way my mother could rewrite any narrative where I was the problem. But I didn't reply, because the version of me who used to seek her approval was gone. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter. Not to her, not to Lisa, but to myself. I wrote down everything I remembered, the little slights, the silent withdrawals, the way I dimmed myself to make others comfortable. And then, I ended it with a promise. I will not explain my worth again to those who diminish it in silence. I closed the laptop. And that's when the knock came again. Only this time, it wasn't Lisa. It was my sister. My sister Ellen stood in the doorway like a storm waiting to break. No text, no call, no warning. Just her, coat still zipped, face flushed not from the cold, but from the fury she was clearly holding behind her teeth. "Can I come in?" she asked, in a tone that wasn't really a question. I stepped aside. She didn't wait for an answer. Her boots thudded against the cabin floor with that purposeful stomp she had perfected since childhood, the stomp that used to mean I didn't get my way. She walked straight to the kitchen table and dropped a canvas bag onto it. Groceries, her version of peace offerings, but the tension in the air wasn't something frozen peas or wine could fix. "I thought we could cook together, like old times," she said, avoiding eye contact. I didn't move. "You came all the way here to cook." "No, I came to talk, but I figured you'd listen better if your mouth was full." I raised an eyebrow. "Cute." She started unpacking tomatoes, pasta, parmesan, basil, the makings of Mom's infamous holiday lasagna. It used to be our thing, layering noodles while Mom nagged about portion sizes and Lisa played music too loud from her phone. Those nights had felt warm once, before warmth became currency and I stopped being invited to the table. Ellen didn't speak as she chopped onions, and I didn't offer to help. There was a wall between us, not new, but finally visible. And somehow, that was more honest than any fake holiday greeting ever had been. "I didn't know what Lisa told you," she finally said. "About Christmas, about how she got invited." I didn't respond. She asked if it was okay. I swear she did. And I told her, "Yeah, of course, I didn't think." "That maybe I wouldn't be okay with it," I snapped. She paused, knife mid-air. "No, that you'd disappear over it. You've never been dramatic." I laughed, cold and sharp. "Is that what this is, drama?" "Claire," she sighed, "we didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." That silence between us then, it was thick, like smoke before the fire. "I didn't think I had to pick sides," she said softly. "But you did. And you did pick. You just didn't want to admit it." She turned to me, eyes wet but not spilling over. "You think I chose Lisa over you? I think you chose comfort. You chose the version of family that didn't require confrontation. And yeah, Lisa fits into that version better than I do." She set down the knife, walked around the counter, stood in front of me like she wanted to say something that mattered but didn't know how. "You used to be the strong one," she said, "the one who could hold us all together. And when you stopped, it felt like the center cracked. I blinked. You mean when I stopped pretending I was okay with being invisible? She looked away. I didn't let her dodge. You didn't defend me, Ellen. Not once. Not when Mom said I was always so sensitive. Not when Lisa kept coming to family dinners like we were still together and I was the mistake. I thought you didn't want me to take sides.
I didn't. I wanted you to see me.
The tears finally came then from both of us. Quiet at first, then deep. Old sobs that came from years of swallowing things whole. She sat. I sat. The lasagna went cold. The wine stayed corked. The pasta never boiled. But the silence that, for the first time, felt earned. After a while, Ellen said, "She's leaving. Lisa. She told me yesterday."
I know. She stopped by.
She said she still loves you. I shook my head. She loves the version of me that let her stay loved without giving anything back.
Ellen nodded, slowly. You're different now.
I had to be. And then, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in years, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. I just reached out. We held hands, like we used to when Dad died, and we were too young to understand grief except by holding tighter. We didn't fix everything that night. We didn't even try. But the next morning, I found a note she left on the fridge before heading out. "When you're ready, I want to help rebuild this. On your terms. Not Mom's. Not Lisa's. Yours." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. I spent the next week at the cabin alone again, but this time it felt intentional. Not lonely. I cleaned. I rearranged the furniture. I burned old letters. I rewrote new ones. And then, on the last day of the year, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in Lisa's handwriting. Inside a photo of us from years ago, framed. Behind it, a note. "You taught me what love costs. I just never learned how to pay it. I hope you spend this year choosing people who do." I placed it in the drawer with the others. Not out of spite, not out of sadness, but to remind myself of what clarity feels like. Because for the first time in years, I was no longer waiting for a knock at the door. I was building something that couldn't be taken away not by silence, not by guilt, and definitely not by people who only showed up when it was convenient. New Year's Day arrived with a heavy sky and a stillness that felt ceremonial. The snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the woods in a silence so pure I could hear my own heartbeat echo as I stood by the cabin window, coffee cooling in my hand. There were no more visitors, no knocks, no ghosts from the past begging to be heard, just me, and the air, and the creaking of pine trees bearing weight they never asked for. It was the first New Year in over a decade that I hadn't been at my mother's house. No cold casserole, no awkward family photos, no strained conversation or Lisa's laugh echoing through the hallway like she belonged to the roots of the place. And that was exactly why I chose to stay here. The cabin, once my father's favorite place in the world, had become a sort of spiritual exile for me. Until now. Because this time, I wasn't here to escape them. I was here to reclaim myself. Around noon, I pulled out the old storage bin from beneath the bed. It smelled like dust and cedar. Inside were boxes of photos, crumpled Christmas cards, Dad's flannel jacket, and the deed to the cabin, signed over to me just weeks before he died. I hadn't looked at it in years. Back then, I'd been too afraid of what it meant: ownership, solitude, responsibility. But now it felt different. Now it felt like an inheritance I finally had the strength to accept. I ran my fingers over the ink of his signature, remembering his quiet warmth. He was the only one in our family who ever made space for silence that wasn't loaded with judgment. I missed him with a sharpness that made my breath catch, but I also felt him here, in the grain of the floors, the crackle of the wood stove, the worn corners of every book he left behind. In the afternoon, I drove into town. Small errands, groceries, firewood, batteries. On impulse, I stopped by the print shop. I handed the girl at the counter a thumb drive. "I need a sign made," I told her. 3 hours later, I hammered it into the tree right at the entrance of the cabin drive. Simple, bold black letters on a wooden plank. Private property, not a family retreat. It was petty, and it was perfect. That night, I lit a fire and wrote out everything I never said. Not in an email, not in a letter, but on scraps of old receipts, napkins, wrappers, every resentment, every betrayal. The moment Mom told me I was too emotional for standing up to Lisa. The time Ellen changed the subject when I said I felt forgotten. The dozen tiny moments they pretended I didn't exist while smiling through dinner. One by one, I burned them in the fireplace. The flames didn't crackle with drama, they hissed quietly, like a soft goodbye. Then came the final ritual. I reached for the storage box again and pulled out the photo Lisa had sent, the one from our trip to Vermont. Us wrapped in scarves and possibility. I stared at it for a long moment, not out of grief, out of clarity. Love, when real, doesn't require martyrdom. It doesn't ask you to disappear so others feel more comfortable. I tore the photo in half, then again, then again. Afterward, I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The stars were brutal and beautiful overhead. The air was razor sharp, but clean, pure. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from Ellen. "Mom's upset you didn't come home. She says you're distancing yourself on purpose." I told her maybe that's what healing looks like. I smiled. "Thanks," I texted back. "Tell her I'm exactly where I need to be." I didn't check her reply. Instead, I walked to the edge of the woods, where the cabin path met the old snowmobile trail. I stood there for a while, breathing in that impossible quiet, letting it settle where guilt used to live. The revenge people expect is loud, explosive, screaming matches or cut ties or scorched earth. But mine was subtle, steady. I stopped bleeding for people who didn't notice I was cut. I stopped giving explanations to those who only listened for flaws. I stopped asking for space and simply took it. The final morning I spent at the cabin, I sat by the window with a fresh journal and no plans, no resolutions, no need to document growth for the sake of it. I had already grown, not taller or louder, but deeper, rooted. As the sun rose behind the tree line, the cabin no longer felt like a place I hid in. It felt like a place I claimed. And finally, a place I could call mine, not just on paper, but in every breath, every silence, every choice. I returned to the city 3 days after New Year's, not because I missed it, but because I needed to prove something to myself, that I could re-enter the world without shrinking, that silence could be a boundary, not a punishment. The first thing I noticed, my apartment didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a choice. I unpacked slowly, placing new things where old ones used to sit, the framed cabin photo in the hallway, not the one Lisa sent, one I took of the frost-covered trees, a single wooden chair near the window, and on my desk, a small brass plaque I had custom engraved the day after I burned the past. Nothing owed, nothing held, nothing left to prove. Over the next few weeks, I didn't reach out to my mother. I didn't answer Ellen's second message, even though it came with a picture of us as kids, captioned, "I miss this version of us." Maybe one day we get back to that, but not yet. Because healing isn't about going backward, it's about building something forward that doesn't compromise who you've become. Lisa texted once more, just a single line. "Do you ever wonder if we could have made it work?" I stared at it for 3 minutes, then 4, and then I blocked her. Not in anger, but because some questions don't deserve answers, especially when they come from people who never stayed for the consequences. I got back to work, quietly, steadily, the kind of freelance editing that didn't make headlines but paid bills. I declined invitations I didn't feel like accepting. I took solo walks without headphones. I went days without explaining myself to anyone, and it felt like wealth. People around me noticed. "You seem calmer," a coworker said, like sharper, clearer. I smiled. That's what peace does. It redefines your edges. I joined a ceramics class on Thursday nights. The instructor, Malcolm, had a voice like smooth wood and a laugh that didn't require permission. He didn't ask about my past. He taught me to shape clay by listening to how it resisted. "You can't force it," he said one night, guiding my hands. "You have to meet it where it is not where you wish it were." Funny how the same principle applies to people. By spring, I no longer flinched when someone brought up family. I could say, "We're complicated," without bitterness. I had stopped bleeding invisible. I had stopped apologizing for needing air. And one warm Sunday, as the first flowers pushed through the cracks in the city concrete, I did something small but seismic. I mailed a letter to myself. "Dear Claire, you didn't need revenge. You needed clarity. You didn't need closure. You needed release. And you didn't need them to say sorry. You needed to stop asking for it." Inside the envelope, I tucked a photo of the cabin sign, "Private property, not a family retreat," because that line had saved me not just from them, but from my own old habits of explaining pain to people who'd never feel it. And when I opened the mailbox a week later and found it waiting addressed to me, from me, I smiled. It was the first love letter I'd ever received that told the truth. Story 2. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 28, and I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who walked away from her entire family. I used to think people who went no contact were just being dramatic Reddit types who couldn't handle minor conflicts. But that was before I realized what happens when you spend your whole life being the background character in your own story. Constantly overlooked, constantly expected to shrink to make room for someone else's spotlight. My younger sister, Emma, is 26, a force of nature, the type of woman who walks into a room and somehow the room rearranges itself around her. Gorgeous, charismatic, effortlessly adored. She's a full-time influencer now, lifestyle content, beauty tutorials, faux inspirational reels, and my parents think she's the second coming of Oprah. I work in data analytics for an insurance company in Philadelphia. I like my job. I'm good at it. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. Unlike Emma, I didn't grow up being celebrated for every mediocre thing I did. I got straight A's good. Keep it up. Emma got a B+, and it was like someone set off fireworks in the living room. She crashed Dad's car at 17, and it was a learning experience. I delayed getting my license because of anxiety and was told I needed to grow up. I was always the serious one, the reliable one, the one who babysat without asking for money, who remembered birthdays, who helped clean up after Christmas dinners while Emma was busy taking selfies in the kitchen. Still, when Emma announced her engagement to Tom last year, I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe I'd get to be part of something. I'd imagined being there as she picked out her dress, standing beside her as a bridesmaid, helping her glue together centerpieces or cry through her vows. Instead, I found out I wasn't even invited to the wedding. Not "you're not a bridesmaid," not "you'll be seated near the back." No, I was completely excluded. I only discovered it when my cousin Madison accidentally posted a picture of the bridal party list on her Instagram story. 12 bridesmaids. 12 including 2 of Emma's TikTok co-workers she'd met less than a year ago. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some lost invitation, a communication error. So I called my mom. She sighed. "It's Emma's day," she said, "and she wants to keep it small. Don't take it personally, small." There were 12 women on that list, and I wasn't one of them. When I confronted Emma directly, she didn't sugarcoat it. "You're just not someone I picture being part of my wedding," she said. "I need people around me who are fun and uplifting. You're always heavy." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just an oversight. This was deliberate. A lifetime of judgment and quiet dismissals culminating in one clear, brutal sentence. And my family silent. My dad didn't say a word. My mom changed the subject. My brother Noah, who usually avoids conflict like it's radioactive, mumbled something about how I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. So I stopped trying. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just pulled back, quietly. I didn't go to the bridal shower. I skipped the engagement party. I started making space for myself, without explanation. And 2 months before the wedding, I booked a 10-day solo trip to Iceland. I told no one, not until the week of the wedding. When my mom asked what I'd be wearing to the reception, "I won't be there," I said. "I'm going away." "You're seriously skipping your sister's wedding?" she gasped, appalled. "You mean the wedding I wasn't invited to?" "Well, you could have come, if you'd just asked." That sentence stayed with me like I was supposed to beg for a seat at a table where I'd already been told I didn't belong. I left for Iceland 2 days later. I didn't check my phone once. I hiked glaciers, bathed in hot springs, ate thick slabs of buttered rye bread, and drank coffee alone in quiet cafes, for the first time in years. I didn't feel small. But I had no idea what would be waiting when I turned my phone back on. The moment I stepped off the plane back in Philadelphia and turned my phone on, the notifications came in like a tidal wave. 68 missed calls, 112 unread texts, 11 voicemails. My stomach dropped. For one fleeting, awful second, I thought someone had died. But it wasn't a tragedy, not in the conventional sense. The wedding had imploded the night before the ceremony. Emma had caught Tom cheating with one of her bridesmaids. From what I pieced together later, it had started as a quiet suspicion, something about a few too many late-night texts, lingering glances at rehearsals. Then Emma had gone through his phone the night before the wedding and found confirmation, a series of explicit messages between Tom and one of her closest friends, Kelly, the same Kelly who had made the joke at the engagement party about snagging a man like Tom before he gets bored. The entire event unraveled within hours. Emma called off the ceremony. Guests were notified last minute. The reception venue tried to salvage the catering, but ended up dumping half of it. The bridesmaids were caught in a civil war. My parents were humiliated. And I was unreachable. I listened to my mom's sobbing voicemails one by one. "Please, Rachel, your sister needs you. She's devastated." Then another. "Don't be petty. This is bigger than your feelings right now." My dad, who rarely ever texted, had actually written, "Please call your sister. She's not okay." My brother Noah sent a generic, "Whatever happened before, it doesn't matter now. Just be there for her." Be there. For the person who decided I didn't belong in her most important day. I waited 3 days before responding, not out of malice, but out of clarity. I needed space to process not just the collapse of the wedding, but the emotional whiplash of suddenly being wanted only in crisis. Then, with deliberate calm, I sent one message in the family group chat, the same one I had been quietly removed from months ago. "I wasn't invited to the wedding. You made it clear I wasn't wanted. Don't reach out now just because it's convenient. I hope Emma's okay. But I'm not your emotional support system. Take care." Silence. Not a single response. Well, except Madison, my cousin. She DM'd me privately. "Just saw your message. Proud of you. Rach, someone needed to say it. That was it. No flood of apologies, no calls, no epiphanies, just silence. And in that silence, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. 5 months passed. Emma eventually sent me a text. One line. "I'm sorry for how things happened with the wedding. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was under a lot of pressure." It didn't even feel like her, more like something her therapist told her to send. No follow-up, no phone call, no real conversation, I replied, saying I appreciated the message and was still taking space. She never responded. In the meantime, my mother took a different route. She started rewriting the narrative. Extended relatives began asking why I had abandoned the family in a time of crisis. I heard through the grapevine that she told people I had always been overly sensitive, and that my decision to go to Iceland was a dramatic stunt. These were the same people who didn't notice or didn't care that I wasn't even invited in the first place.
And no one, not one person in that circle, asked how I was doing.
But for once, I didn't need them to, because something unexpected had started growing in that distance, a sense of peace, of ownership, of freedom. But peace doesn't mean closure, and the real reckoning hadn't even begun. After that final, hollow apology from Emma, and the family's silence that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. I started therapy, not the kind you go to once a month and nod politely at. Real, gritty, exhausting therapy. I needed to dissect years of quiet bitterness I had packed neatly into the corners of my personality like unlabeled boxes in a forgotten attic. It wasn't just about the wedding. That was the trigger. Yes, but the wound had been festering long before that. There were memories I hadn't thought about in years, suddenly resurfacing in full color. Emma getting the larger birthday party, the first car, the louder applause at her school play, even when I was valedictorian. Me holding back tears when our mom said, "Rachel, be more like your sister. She knows how to enjoy life." And maybe the most painful one when I got into Columbia, and no one in my family came to move me in. They were at one of Emma's cheer tournaments across the state. I unpacked alone that day. No pictures, no backpats. Just me and a heavy suitcase. Therapy gave me the language for what I had been feeling: parentification, emotional neglect, and an identity wrapped in being useful but invisible. And slowly, something shifted. I stopped shrinking myself to be digestible. I started saying no. I didn't attend Easter dinner. I skipped a cousin's baby shower. I stopped responding to the generic group chats full of emojis and forced holiday cheer. In that vacuum, I made room for new things. I took a second solo trip, this time to Kyoto. I wandered through bamboo forests and ancient temples, ate matcha in back alley cafes, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest: ease. When I got back to the States, things started aligning like puzzle pieces that had always been there, just jammed into the wrong places. I was promoted, finally recognized for my work at the marketing agency, not because I hustled harder, but because I finally advocated for myself. I even moved into a new apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a plant I hadn't yet killed. And then love. Unexpected, unassuming, but solid. His name was Eli. We met at a bookstore in Old City. He was reaching for the same copy of a memoir I adored. We both laughed awkwardly and started talking. One coffee led to a long walk, which led to Sundays reading in silence together, which led to the first time I felt seen without performing. But healing isn't linear. One afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, that wasn't. I got a call from my dad. I didn't pick up, but he left a voicemail. His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Rachel, I know things have been broken. I don't know how to fix it, but I wanted to try. Emma's going through a lot. She's in therapy now too. Maybe we can talk." I listened to that message 5 times. A part of me softened. The child in me who still wanted her father to fight for her leaned toward the phone. But the adult in me, the woman I had become through that long year of distance and clarity, held her ground. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with reconciliation. And sometimes, love from afar is the only kind that doesn't burn you. But that's not where the story ends, because someone else was about to crack the facade I had built. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock came. Not a text, not an email, a physical knock on my apartment door. I hesitated, heart lurching. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the hallway camera hadn't pinged my phone. Slowly, I opened it, and standing there was Ava. Ava, my childhood best friend turned distant memory. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years. Life, college, a complicated falling out involving loyalties and misunderstandings had pulled us apart. But there she was, rain jacket soaked, a nervous smile, and a tight grip on her tote bag like it was anchoring her to the ground. "Hi," she said, voice breaking. "I wasn't sure you'd answer."
I blinked. Ava, what?
She took a deep breath. "Can I come in? I have something to tell you. About Emma." The name hit like a glass shattering across a tile floor. Emma. Just when I thought I'd finally managed to let the noise surrounding her die down, it crept back through the cracks like smoke under a locked door. I let her in, not because I was ready, but because I needed to know. We sat across from each other, old familiarity hanging awkwardly between us. She looked thinner, worn, but there was fire in her eyes, something determined. "I started seeing a therapist about a year ago," Ava began. "Same time you went off the grid. I saw your Iceland photos on Instagram. That smile, it wasn't the one you used to fake. That's when I realized how much we'd all failed you." I stayed silent, let her talk. "You remember I was close with Emma in high school, right?" she asked. "We stayed in touch longer than I should have, honestly, but 3 weeks before her wedding. She called me crying, not because she missed you, because she didn't want you there." That made me flinch. Ava noticed. She said, and I quote, "Rachel's just a mood killer. She makes everything about responsibility and rules. I want to celebrate, not be policed." Ava's face hardened. That's when I started seeing it. The subtle cruelty. The way your family let her get away with treating you like a backup generator. There only when things collapsed. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ava continued, softer now. "You weren't wrong. Rachel, none of it was in your head. I'm sorry I didn't defend you back then. I think I was afraid to fall out of favor with the Golden Girl too." It was like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been sitting in for years. The resentment, the confusion, the self-doubt, it all made horrifying sense. But Ava wasn't done. "There's more. I wasn't at the wedding, but I know what really happened. It wasn't just Tom cheating. Emma had been spiraling. Pills, mostly. She started lashing out at everyone, accusing her bridesmaids of disloyalty, sobbing to her mom that she was losing control. Tom didn't just cheat, he left, walked out. He told her, 'You've turned into the person you always said you hated.'" My jaw clenched. For a brief second, pity threatened to rise, but I shut it down. And now I asked. "She's in outpatient treatment," Ava said. "And your mom, she started telling people you've cut off contact because you're unstable, that you're bitter and jealous and always had a dark streak." Ava's voice cracked again. "I thought you should know." Something inside me twisted not with rage, but with clarity. The narrative they had built didn't just exclude me. It painted me as the villain in their fairy tale collapse. Even in my silence, I was a threat. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you for telling me." "I wasn't trying to make you forgive them," Ava said, standing. "I just thought you deserved the truth." I nodded. I did. And as she left, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry, not the searing, blinding kind. It was colder now, sharper, like ice forming where fire used to burn. Because now I had the full story, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. It was strange how peace didn't come with thunder. It didn't crash down dramatically or arrive with some triumphant declaration. Instead, it seeped in quietly, methodically, like a tide reclaiming its shore after a long, bitter storm. After Ava left, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat in silence, digesting the truth I had always suspected but never heard aloud. They hadn't just ignored me, they had rewritten me, in their story. I was the problem too serious, too cold, too hard to love. That wasn't just erasure, that was vilification. But now, I had the whole picture. For weeks, I did nothing. Not because I was paralyzed, but because I was planning. There's a specific kind of strength that comes from no longer needing validation. I wasn't interested in reclaiming my seat at their table. I was building a new one entirely. And I'd only invite those who knew how to make space. I started by writing. Not a rage-fueled email, not a dramatic blog post, a personal essay. It wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility, about naming what so many people endure in silence, the quiet cruelty of being the family afterthought. I called it The Invisible Sister, and it resonated. Within a week of publishing it anonymously on Medium, it had over 20,000 views. Comments poured in from strangers around the world, men and women who had been erased in their own families, who had been told their worth was conditional on being agreeable, quiet, useful. One comment stood out. I didn't know how to say goodbye to people who never really saw me. Now I do. Thank you. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just healing, I was helping others do the same. That was power. But even then, part of me hesitated. Should I tell them? Should I reach out? Ask for closure that I already knew they wouldn't give honestly. Therapy had taught me that closure isn't something you get from others. It's something you give yourself when you accept that some people are only capable of loving you in the way that's convenient for them. And sometimes, that love isn't love at all. It's control dressed in tradition. Still, I wrote one more thing, a letter, not to be sent, but to be said. I read it aloud in my apartment one rainy evening, candlelight flickering against the window like soft punctuation. Dear Emma, I began, my voice steady. I used to dream of being your maid of honor. I used to hope that one day you'd see me not just as the quiet sister, not just the backup plan, but as a person. I waited for that day like people wait for spring, but spring never came. What came instead was the realization that I was never invisible. I was ignored, deliberately, repeatedly. And when I chose to stop showing up, not one of you came looking, until everything fell apart, and I was suddenly useful again. I'm not angry anymore, Emma, but I'm done. Done making myself small so others can feel big. Done being the family therapist, the emotional punching bag, the good daughter by default. You chose your bridesmaids. I'm choosing myself. And then I folded it, tucked it into the back of my journal, and left it there like a closed chapter. A month passed, then two, then spring arrived ironically, without fanfare, and with it came something else unexpected, an invitation. Not from Emma, from my Aunt Diane, my father's estranged sister, who'd left the family years ago over some argument I was too young to remember. We'd only met twice, but she'd found me through my essay. She wrote, "Rachel, I recognized your voice immediately. You're not alone in this. I left for similar reasons. If you ever want to come visit Vermont, my cabin's open. No pressure, just space." That invitation was the first act of unconditional welcome I'd received from family in over a decade, and I took it. Vermont was magic. Not the fairy tale kind, real magic. The kind that lives in pine-scented air and conversations held without judgment. Diane was exactly who I needed in that moment, honest, warm. and unwilling to pretend pain didn't exist. She didn't ask me to reconcile. She just asked me how I was doing, and meant it. Over cups of tea and long hikes. She shared stories about my father I'd never heard, the sensitive side he buried after marrying my mother. The way he once wrote poetry in college, but gave it up to be practical. It didn't excuse how he'd treated me, but it gave context. And with that context came a kind of forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. I had spent years trying to earn a love that was never designed to see me clearly. That wasn't my fault. That wasn't my failure. And then one evening, while watching the lake from her porch, Diane asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I did. Only if they meet me where I am, not where they want me to stay. She nodded, like she'd already known that answer, like she was proud. Back in New York, life bloomed again. My job promoted me to creative strategy lead. I moved into a loft with exposed brick and a window that poured in golden light every morning. I adopted a rescue dog named Mocha, who snored like an old man and followed me everywhere. I fell in love with someone who didn't just listen, but remembered, who never asked me to dim my light to make room for theirs. And one afternoon, as I returned from a farmer's market with flowers tucked under my arm, I saw the message. From Emma. It was long, longer than I expected, not perfect, but honest in a way that stopped me in my tracks. "I've started therapy," she wrote. "I don't expect you to reply, but I needed to tell you I see it now. What I did, what we all did. You were the mirror we refused to look into. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I don't know if we'll ever be close again, but I hope one day we can talk, for real this time, no performances." I stared at that message for hours, not because I didn't believe her, but because, for the first time, I didn't need anything from her. Not an apology, not a connection, not even closure. That was the freedom. I didn't reply, not yet, maybe not ever, because healing isn't a performance either. It's a quiet revolution, and mine was well underway. So if you're listening to this, and you've been the invisible sibling, the background character, the one who was always too much or not enough, this is your sign. You don't have to stay in the room just because you were born in it. You can walk out and build your own. Story 3. My name is Emily Carter, and when I was 15 years old, my parents left me at a gas station off Interstate 15 in Nevada on purpose. They said it was a joke, something to toughen me up, but I never went back. That was the day my real life began, though it didn't feel like it at the time. It felt like betrayal so sharp, it left a mark on my soul that no amount of time could smooth over. It was summer. The sun was high and blistering. We'd been on a family road trip, me, my dad Frank, my mom Darlene, my sister Rachel, and my older brother Kyle. We stopped at a dusty, near-abandoned gas station for snacks and a bathroom break. I remember coming back outside, wiping my hands on my jeans, expecting to see our beat-up SUV parked by the curb, but it wasn't. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 30. At first, I thought they were messing with me, playing some twisted family game of hide and seek. I walked around the building, checked behind the dumpsters, even waited by the ice machine thinking maybe they were testing me, but they never came back. I had no phone, no ID, no money, just a crumpled receipt in my back pocket, and a heart that had just learned what abandonment felt like. I slept behind the station that night, curled into myself, flinching at every rustle in the dark. The second day, I panhandled for change to buy a bottle of water. On the third day, sunburned and starving, I met Tina and Harold Whitmore, an older couple who had once lived their lives behind the wheel of a long-haul truck. Tina saw me from across the lot, walked over, and asked, "Sweetheart, where's your family?" I looked at her with eyes that had aged 100 years, in 3 days, and simply said, "Gone, that night." I slept in the back of their trailer, surrounded by old flannel blankets and the smell of coffee grounds. They took me to their small home outside Mesquite and later helped me connect with a youth outreach pastor named Mark, who didn't ask too many questions.
The Whitmores didn't have much, but they gave me more than my blood ever did: consistency, dignity, a door that was never slammed in my face. I helped out in Harold's small garage, learned how to strip rust, repaint panels, rebuild engines. By 17, I was rebuilding my own life. I got my GED, then studied mechanics at a community college. I filed the paperwork to change my name legally at 21. I stopped being the girl my parents left and became Emily Carter, someone I built from the ground up. Harold passed when I was 25. I was the one holding his hand. Tina still calls me kiddo and sends me fruitcake every Christmas, even though I hate raisins. She doesn't care. That's love. A few weeks ago, I was featured in a local magazine for women in business. They called my restoration garage the most soulful shop in Denver. It was a sweet article until the wrong people read it. This morning, I woke up to 39 missed calls from numbers I didn't know. Then came the text. "Dad's dying. He wants to see you. Please call." It was from Rachel. I hadn't heard her name aloud in over a decade. Suddenly, the silence I'd carved out so carefully cracked, and the past spilled in like floodwater. But I wasn't drowning, not yet. I was still standing. And I wasn't the girl behind the gas station anymore. But something told me, to truly move forward, I'd have to face the people who left me behind. I didn't return the text immediately. I let it sit there, unread, like a thorn under my skin. Days passed before I picked up the phone. It wasn't guilt that made me do it. It was clarity. I needed to hear it, needed to know that, after all this time, they were finally ready to admit what they did, or at least try. I didn't expect closure, but I craved truth. I called the number. Kyle answered. His voice was casual, warm even, like we were old friends catching up after college. "Emily, wow, it's been..." "What? 2 decades," he laughed, as if this were a family reunion over iced tea. "Man, we gotta catch up. Remember the lake house? And those dumb firework fights I didn't indulge him?" I asked. Straight to the bone. "Did you leave me at that gas station on purpose?" Silence. Then a dismissive chuckle. "Come on, Em. It was a joke. We thought you'd catch up. You took it way too seriously." I felt my stomach tighten. "You never came back. You never reported me missing. You never even looked." His tone shifted. Defensive now. "Dad said you were probably hitching a ride. Mom thought you needed to be tougher. We didn't think you'd actually disappear." I pressed further, demanded answers I knew would hurt to hear. That's when the real reason came out. "We saw your article," he said. "Your garage, your success. It's awesome. We thought maybe it was time for the family to reconnect. You know, be there for each other, like old times." It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was opportunity. They saw me doing well and decided they wanted in. I hung up mid-sentence, blocked the number. But I should have known people like them don't walk away quietly. 3 nights later, I pulled into my driveway and spotted a car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, the engine off, but I recognized the silhouette on the sidewalk before I even stepped out. My mother, Darlene. Same posture, same manipulative poise. She wore tears like jewelry, clutched her purse like a peace offering. Behind her in the car, my sister Rachel was scrolling her phone, more bored than concerned. "Emily." My mother called out, voice shaking, rehearsed.
We just want to talk. Your dad. He doesn't have much time. I didn't move at first. My boots felt nailed to the pavement. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected. You left me. At 15. Alone. No phone. No money. You never came back. She stepped forward, but I held up my hand. Stop. You don't get to rewrite this. Her lip trembled. We didn't know it would go that far. We were trying to teach you something. We didn't mean for it to become this. Rachel finally rolled down the window and called out, annoyed. Come on, Em, let it go already. It's been 20 years. I turned and walked inside, closed the door, drew the curtains. They stayed out there for almost an hour before leaving. I didn't watch them go. I didn't need to. Later that night, an email arrived from my father's account. The subject line was, "Let's talk," inside. It said he was sorry if they had caused pain, that he forgave me for cutting them off, and hoped I'd do the right thing by showing up in his final days. It ended with, "A good daughter doesn't abandon her parents." I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I ordered a full set of security cameras. I updated my locks. Peace, once fought for, is worth defending. And in that quiet evening, with the scent of engine grease still clinging to my skin and Tina's chicken casserole warming in the oven, I knew I'd made the right choice. But I also knew one thing for certain: they weren't done yet. And this time, I would be ready. About 3 weeks passed. The texts stopped. The calls faded. The car that used to park across the street never returned. And for a while, I let myself believe it was over. My life became quiet again. The Hargroves came by for Sunday dinner. The auto shop was busy with a new restoration project, and for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy, it was earned. I felt like I'd finally buried that old chapter. Until the letter arrived. A certified envelope, postmarked from my hometown, bearing the name of a law firm I vaguely recognized. I didn't open it immediately. My hands went cold just holding it. I called my lawyer, let him open and read it instead. When he called me back, his voice was steady but layered with disbelief. "Emily," he said, "your biological father passed. They're naming you in the will." I didn't respond at first. "Do I inherit anything?" I asked. "Yes," he said. Then a pause. "But not what you think." It turned out my inheritance wasn't money, or property, or anything with value. It was debt. Tens of thousands in unpaid loans, maxed out credit cards, and a house so underwater with mortgage liens it should have sunk to the core. My father, in his last pathetic play, tried to saddle me with the mess he left behind, but he didn't count on the fact that I'd severed every legal tie to that family over a decade ago. New name, new records, new life. My lawyer assured me I could reject the inheritance entirely, and I did. Permanently, officially. No obligation, no guilt. Still, the bitterness of it gnawed at me. Not just the attempt to stick me with their wreckage, but the fact that even in death, he used his last breath not for truth or love, but manipulation. There was no apology, no letter of remorse, just more cleanup for me to do. I thought that would be the end, but toxicity rarely dies quietly. Rachel, my sister, posted about me on Facebook. She used my old name when she hadn't spoken in decades and wrote a long, sob-soaked message about how her brother abandoned their dying father and was too greedy to help the family that raised him. Raised me. They left me. They discarded me like a roadside soda can. But in her version, I was the villain, the selfish traitor, the one who owed them for years of sacrifice. People I hadn't spoken to in 20 years began messaging me. Some were cruel, parroting Rachel's poison. Others were confused. but a surprising number were supportive. Classmates from high school, an old teacher, even one of the neighbors from our street when I was a kid. I always wondered what happened to you. One message said, "I knew something wasn't right in that house. I'm glad you made it out." For a while, I felt a flicker of something close to validation. Like, maybe, finally, someone saw the truth I had carried alone for so long. But then came the fear, what if they showed up again? What if the next envelope wasn't just legal paperwork? So I took steps. I officially rerouted all my mail through a secure P.O. box, installed high-resolution security cameras covering every angle of my home, upgraded locks. I wasn't being paranoid. I was preserving peace. And then, one quiet Tuesday night, Mrs. Hargrove came by with a pot roast. We sat at the dinner table, two people who found each other through loss and chose each other through love. She brought out an old photo album, its corners worn and pages soft with time. Inside were pictures of me, back when I was just a scared teenager with grease on my jeans and a chip on my shoulder. One photo showed me helping Mr. Hargrove change out an alternator. Another was of my first garage opening, all of us smiling like we'd built it with our bare hands because we had. She patted my hand and said, "You were always meant to find your real family, sweetheart. Blood just gets you started. Love is what makes you stay." I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking fast. She wasn't just saying that to comfort me. She meant it, and I believed her. Because unlike the people who left me behind, she never stopped showing up, for the first time in years. My heart felt quiet, not empty, just still. The noise of regret, guilt, unresolved trauma, it had dulled to a low murmur. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finally free. But trauma doesn't always leave the way it entered. Sometimes it seeps out slowly, disguised as nostalgia. Sometimes it returns in the form of questions you never dared to ask before. And sometimes it shows up in the mirror, in the way you flinch when a door slams too hard, or the way you still check your rearview mirror twice on your drive home. I knew I'd closed the door on them, but a small, stubborn piece of me still wondered if closure required something more. A week after Mrs. Hargrove's visit, I found myself sitting at my desk, rereading my father's email, the one where he forgave me. I hadn't responded. I'd forwarded it to my lawyer and moved on, but staring at those words again, his complete lack of ownership, the veiled guilt-tripping, the audacity to suggest I owed him kindness, something in me boiled. Closure didn't come from confrontation. It came from understanding that I never owed them anything to begin with. Still, I needed one last thing to make peace with the version of myself that waited for them to come back at that gas station. So I drove. It wasn't planned. I just woke up one morning, filled a thermos with coffee, and got in the truck. I drove out of town, then onto the highway, following the familiar exits I had long ago sworn to forget. And after 2 hours, there it was, the same gas station, now slightly modernized, but the skeleton of the place was intact. The pumps had new card readers. The signs were brighter, but the air, it smelled the same. That dry, dusty blend of gasoline and heat. I walked behind the building, to the spot where I had slept my first night alone, curled against the concrete wall, jacket zipped over my knees. I stood there, hands in my pockets, heart pounding like it was 15 again. And I whispered, "You did nothing wrong," to that scared kid who waited until sunrise for headlights that never returned. You survived. It wasn't cinematic, no epiphany, no dramatic breakdown, just a steady inhale and a slow release, like I'd been holding my breath for 2 decades and finally remembered how to exhale. I got back in the truck and drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts, Just me and the road, and the knowledge that I had just visited my past without being owned by it. Back home, there was one last loose thread. I pulled out a weathered cardboard box from my storage closet, the only one I had kept from my old life. Inside were fragments I hadn't been ready to throw away: a high school yearbook, a photo with a crooked smile, a birthday card from a grandmother who died before everything fractured. I sifted through it slowly, memory by memory, pain by pain, and then I lit a fire in the backyard. I didn't watch the flames dance dramatically. I didn't cry. I just stood there, feeding the past to the fire, like fuel that no longer served me. And when the last corner of paper curled and crumbled into ash, I whispered, "We're done." That night, Mrs. Hargrove called. "How are you feeling, hun?" she asked, her voice warm like tea on a cold night.
"I think I'm finally free," I said. "You always were," she replied. "You just needed to believe it." We didn't talk long, just enough. After hanging up, I stood on my porch and looked out at the sky. It was clear, stars crisp, no clouds, and I thought about how healing isn't loud. It doesn't scream. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, not like a victory march, but a deep breath and a closed door. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking ahead. It started with silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that howls beneath your skin. The kind that screams everything your family pretended wasn't real. The kind that follows you like a shadow long after you've turned the lights on. 3 months had passed since I burned the last remnants of my childhood, figuratively and literally. Since I stood behind that gas station where I was abandoned at 15. Whispered to the girl I was, and left her there, safe in the past. I thought that was it. Closure. Done. But grief has a funny way of lingering. Especially grief for a family that never really existed the way you needed them to. Then came the knock. It was late. The sun had already bled from the sky. Leaving behind the heavy indigo of a Midwest evening, I was curled up on the couch, sipping tea, the soft hum of jazz floating through the speakers. Peace. Then 3 knocks sharp, hesitant, and familiar in the worst way. I didn't move at first. My heart raced, throat tightened, and for a second I was 15 again, waiting at that gas station, hoping they'd come back. But I wasn't that girl anymore. So I stood up, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. My sister. Not crying this time, not yelling either, just standing there with her arms crossed, like someone who had been forced to show up. I opened the door, but only halfway. "What do you want?" Rachel, I asked, calm but tired. She didn't flinch. "Mom died," she said flatly. I didn't say anything, not because I was shocked, but because I felt nothing. "She had a stroke." Rachel continued. "She was in the hospital for a few days, but it was fast." Still, silence. She waited, like maybe I'd cry, or gasp, or ask if she suffered. I didn't. "She asked about you," she said after a beat, said she hoped you'd come to the funeral. Why, I asked. So you could all pretend we were one big happy family again. Rachel exhaled, frustrated, because she was our mother. "No," I said. "She was yours. You got birthday cakes and family dinners. I got gas station concrete and 2 decades of silence." She stepped back like I'd slapped her. "You're so dramatic." There it was, the line that had haunted my entire childhood. I almost laughed. Almost. "I'm not coming," I said, and closed the door without another word. My heart didn't race this time. No shaking hands, just resolve. But, of course, they didn't stop. A week later, I received a letter in the mail from another law office. Rachel had contested the will. Apparently, Mom had left everything to her except a photo album labeled
For Ellie. My birth name. She demanded I take it, said it was what Mom wanted. But I knew better. That album wasn't a gift. It was bait. Still, I let my curiosity win. My lawyer picked it up on my behalf and dropped it off. I stared at it for 3 days before finally opening it. Inside were pictures from before. Me at 7, missing my front teeth. Me at 10 with scraped knees and a forced smile. Me at 13, standing behind the family, slightly out of frame in every shot. There were no captions, no notes, just frozen moments of someone they didn't know how to love. And tucked in the back, one single envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten in slanted cursive. I read it twice. It didn't say sorry. It didn't explain. It just said she'd always been hard on me because she wanted me to be strong, that she never expected me to leave, that losing me had hurt, but that she didn't know how to say it.
I folded the letter and placed it in the fire pit. It burned quickly. Some things didn't deserve to be saved. But not everything in that album was a wound.
Near the end, I found something I hadn't expected: photos of me and the Hargroves, old Polaroids from when they came to my high school graduation, pictures from the day I got my business license, even one from last Thanksgiving, where Mrs. Hargrove wore a turkey hat and Bill had stuffed rolls in his pockets. I hadn't known they had access to those. I hadn't known someone had been watching, collecting proof that I'd thrived.
That's when it hit me. Maybe Mom hadn't compiled this album for me. Maybe Rachel had. Maybe someone, somewhere, had tried, in a backwards, clumsy way, to understand. But that didn't mean I owed them anything.
The final page held one photo: me, standing in front of my shop, arms crossed, grease on my jeans, smiling wide. It was the only one where I looked truly happy. I closed the album and put it on the shelf, not to keep her close, but to remind myself how far I'd come.
Life moved on.
Business was steady. I hired 2 new mechanics, both young women who reminded me of myself, resilient, sharp, a little rough around the edges. One of them, Tara, had run away at 16 and was living in her car when I met her. I offered her a job in the garage's loft apartment. She cried that night, not because I saved her, but because I believed her. I saw her. I didn't need to ask her story. I already knew the shape of it. Mrs. Hargrove came over every Friday, and we'd cook together, pot roast, peach cobbler. Her stories were always long and winding, but I never stopped her. I liked the way she filled the silence with warmth. And then one morning, I woke up and realized I didn't think about them anymore, not daily, not even weekly. They had become background noise, like the hum of a far-off train you no longer notice after a while. Until the news came. Rachel had written a book, not a bestseller, but a self-published memoir about forgiveness and family healing. In it, she'd painted herself as the sister who tried to reconnect, the daughter torn between loyalties. I was a chapter, a ghost, a warning. She'd changed my name, but not enough. People from back home pieced it together. I started getting messages again, some kind, some vile, some curious. Tara found me crying one afternoon in the shop. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a wrench and said, "Help me with this carburetor."
And that's how I healed, not with apologies or reckonings, but with work, with love given freely, with a chosen family who didn't abandon me for laughs.
I considered writing my own story, but then I realized this was it. This garage, this life, this peace. I didn't need to scream into the void anymore. They'd told the world who they were. Now I was telling it who I'd become.
And that, finally, was enough.